I'm Paul North.
I'm George McBride.
Look at us, George, in our casual wear. I used to be so smart for work. What's your work attire like? Has it gone downhill as well? That's where trackies.
I don't think you can go downhill from an old tracksuit, to be honest.
It's the casual lockdown look in more ways than
Yeah.
one. Thanks for tuning in. Just before we get into the news, we're doing a competition. How exciting. We're going to give a £50 CBD voucher away. All you have to do is like and comment below and let us know which was your favourite story. And then next week, we're going to pull some names out and someone's going to win a £50 voucher. So do it now. Well, in fact, you have to watch the show and then do it after, but you should do it. Get involved. Great. Okay, let's get into the news, George. First up, Barca Cannabis Social Clubs clubbed. Quite like that headline now. I was pleased with that, George. The Supreme Court has said that Barcelona lacks the authority to regulate the operation of cannabis clubs in its territory. So the decision backs up an early decision by the Constitutional Court that also declared the laws unconstitutional. Basically, Barca City Council have said they're not willing to back down. There's a lot of politics going on here, isn't there, George? It's not it's not really about cannabis, is it?
No. And I think that's an interesting point in general, is that rarely is cannabis the most important thing going on in the eyes of decision makers when cannabis is being discussed. There's normally something else which is higher on the agenda. And in Spain, which is a really weird situation where you've got, licensed producers of medical products but no medical market domestically, you've got wide access through the social clubs, and yet nothing even bordering on, not even legal CBD sales. It's an odd situation, and then it's made even more odd by the semi-autonomous regions trying to push forward their own cannabis reforms and getting involved in the bigger political issue in Spain, which is how much power should rest with the central government and how much should rest with the autonomous regions. And this fight's going to continue, isn't it? Because they're going to try and assert their independence by acting, by regulating industry, by taking whatever measures they seem necessary. And then the Spanish authorities are going to keep trying to quash it. And it's all quite odd, because I think cannabis probably would have been legalised in Spain by now if there wasn't this really complex political situation and a big fight for power going on.
Yeah, they're just using it as a bit of a stick to beat Catalonians with, right? It's just become like a bit of a little proxy battle more than anything else.
Yeah.
How is it going generally in Spain with reform? Because you've talked to me a lot. You've been out there, haven't you, to Spain? You've seen the social club model a couple of years ago. What I know you're a fan of kind of that approach of you're not anti-social clubs by any means, but how's it been going over there?
Well, it's a bit of a shame. The social club thing is well established and doesn't seem to be going anywhere, which is great. That there's access, but in terms of strides towards more comprehensive legalization, there isn't even medical legalization or CBD wellness products on the horizon at the moment. So it is very odd, like I was saying, considering they have licensed producers and then no medical access. And despite that there's quite broad support for wider legalization, it doesn't look likely to happen imminently.
No, it's a shame. And it is frustrating when cannabis gets caught up in the politics, especially when it's on the sort of negative side of things. Less of a problem when arguments of legalization and reform are used for a politicized, because obviously that's a good, nice liberal reducing harm. We're in that camp, but it is frustrating when it's kind of used on the other side. We did an event actually. If people are interested to hear from advocates in Spain and what's going on in Spain, we did an event a couple of weeks back the European Cannabis Advocacy Network, and we had an advocate from Spain speaking about their experience. So I'll put a link in the description below if people want to. We recorded the event, so people can go back and watch it. Next up, Leap into Scotland, law enforcement against prohibition. No, Law Enforcement Action Partnership, they're now called. They used to be called Law Against Prohibition. They formally launched their Scottish branch on the 19th of January. They're calling for Scotland to adopt a North American legally regulated cannabis model that will allow shops and cafes to sell cannabis. They're also calling for drug consumption rooms, DCRs, to be given the go-ahead, widespread distribution of the anti-overdose drug naloxone, heroin-assisted treatment on prescription, and drug testing facilities at night spots and universities to allow users to know exactly what they're taking. Nice list of liberal reforms there, George.
Yeah.
You confident of those being taken up in Scotland?
No.
DCRs, maybe. DCRs are a
DCRs,
million miles away in Scotland.
yeah. Decent push from everyone involved who's continuing to provide these services in a really hostile environment. So well done, anyone listening who's working on DCRs in Scotland. Nice seeing Leap move over there. We're big fans of Leap and Neil Woods, who always has really interesting things to say about drug policy. I like the Leap lot in the USA as well, who are much more kind of cowboy vibe to them. People in like big boots with spurs on, talking about how they're sick to death of busting meth labs and watching the situation get worse. But there's nowhere that Leap are more needed than Scotland really at the moment, is there? Because the drug-related harms in Scotland are just phenomenally higher than anywhere else in Europe.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a sign that what's being done at the moment isn't the right thing.
Yeah, there's some great initiative. Peter's up there in the driving his DCR van around. We'll put a link in the description underneath. You should absolutely follow Peter Kraken. The stuff that he's doing in Scotland is amazing. Really, really brave guy, and he reminds me of a lot of the advocacy work which has taken place over in Canada. There's some inspirational characters in Canada who basically just set up their own drug consumption rooms in parks, completely against the law, and just saved life after life after life. And it was through their ongoing campaigning and awareness raising that there's still lots to be done over there. And obviously, they have the added issue to a higher level of fentanyl. But yeah, I kind of like this. I kind of like the initiatives that Peter's taken, and he nearly got prosecuted the other day. Literally got arrested and was almost prosecuted. But I think he had a positive meeting with Nicola Sturgeon. But they got
it's good. I think we work in my job. We work obviously only fully legal activities, helping support legal cannabis businesses, but also a fan of civil disobedience to push things forward. You mentioned Canada, where drug-related harms in certain areas are huge, worse than some areas in Scotland. But there's a history of civil disobedience there too. There's been cannabis dispensaries for 20 years in parts of Canada, and they were just getting shut down and prosecuted, and people just kept reopening them. And local communities just took a stance against the national policies and said, no, we want these dispensaries here. We want patients getting safe access, and we're going to keep reopening these shops no matter how much you keep shutting them down. And I think that's the way to go about it.
Definitely, and I echo your thoughts. That Neil, I love Neil Woods. I think the guy's brilliant. I think he's got so much to offer, and he's such a kind, considered man. But I also think that I love Neil, but the voice of the police, and you spoke to me a lot about this in the past, George. It's just so important. There's such a important voice in the debate for reform, and I know I guess it's difficult for current serving police officers to hold views which are in conflict with the government, because both of us know that that's not a position you can hold really. Certainly not in a position of authority, even to the extent that Joe Kaz, that we've done quite a lot of work with, who was a Met Police special, he got sacked just for saying on Question Time that we should change our cannabis laws. It's basically a sackable offence to say anything that isn't in line with the police, with your constabulary. So I think it's really important that there are groups and organisations that police officers who have retired can get involved in, and give them a platform and the freedom to speak out and do something about it. And you're seeing more and more of these type of characters now. Mike Barton is a good example, isn't he? You know, he was incredibly progressive while he was in post in Durham as the chief inspector there, but now he's come out, he can say, you know, he can say what he was really thinking, and he takes things a step further, doesn't he? So good on Neil and the rest of the Leap crew. Really good to see. And like you say, George, there's no place that needs it more really than Scotland. Oh, you know, we did the story the other week about the 80 mil that the government put into drug treatment services. Scotland did like twice as much actually.
Oh, great.
So like I think they put in I think it's like 160 mil or something like that into Scottish treatment services, which is good. But again, so needed. The death rates there are absolutely appalling. It's terrible. It's completely preventable. And also another chance to big up the work of Naloxone Man on Twitter. Again, we'll put a link in the description below. But there's some superb work. George spearheading that. There's some superb work going on with Naloxone. So another life-saving initiative we can adopt. Back away from wider reform, zoning a bit more on cannabis. Tilray and Aurora are supporting the French trial. Medical cannabis trial in France is going to start, and Tilray will supply the products. I think Aurora is supplying as well. Like, it's not just Tilray, is it? Tilray
It's not. It's more than them as well. UK-based EMAC are in there as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad that there's some real leading names in there, but it's a bit unfortunate in my view the way the French authorities have decided to go about it. On the one hand, they've said that patients aren't going to pay for the cannabis, which is great, but on the other hand, they've said the government's not going to pay either, which has left the companies having to pay. So they're doing that obviously for a range of reasons, but you know, supporting their business objectives in the long term, and helping patients get access, which is part of those companies, you know, modus operandi. But unfortunately it means only that the kind of bigger well-funded companies can actually get involved and do it, because it's obviously difficult for smaller companies to be providing products and services for free where there's no actual guarantee of them getting any money at any point. And this is still a trial, and there isn't any reassurance that this will be widened out into a national access program. So everyone involved in that trial is going to try their best, you know, to ensure that patients get the best treatment, that the government can see the impacts of this scheme, and I'm very confident that it will end up in a national access program in France. And I think those companies which are supplying the scheme are probably likely thinking that it's going to end up in a national access scheme in France too. Otherwise, it's probably unlikely they'd be participating in it and providing their products for free if they thought that there wasn't going to be a market at the end of it.
Yeah, just doing it for a laugh. We don't really talk about, we don't talk about France loads, but then 2 weeks running they've kind of come up. There's been a little bit of a peak in France, hasn't there, in terms of cannabis? There was a big patient survey. They reached out, didn't they, and collected a load of data from the general public as to their levels of support on cannabis, and we had this week. So do you think France is one to kind of keep an eye on in 2021, or are they just going through a pretty standard process, bearing in mind where everybody else is at in Europe?
Yeah, all the countries have their own little oddities, aren't they? It's weird, but highest use rates in Europe, France, but quite conservative attitudes among the establishment, and been very slow to do any kind of reform, and have now, you know, very slowly implemented this small trial of 3,000 patients. So they're very much just dipping their toes in the water, but at least finally it seems to no longer be a taboo to talk about cannabis reform in political spheres in France, and it's now an active topic of conversation. I still think you hear some pretty old-fashioned, to put it politely, comments about cannabis from some quite significant voices in France regularly. So there's still quite a significant social stigma there, which needs to be overcome. But as we, I think, mentioned before, you know, medical access is the best thing for changing attitudes towards cannabis. The more people who have access to cannabis for medical purposes and use it for that, the more we see people's attitudes towards the plant shift. So
Yeah.
even though it's only 3,000 people, I think it's 3,000. There's 3,000 more than there were before, and it's going to change the debate.
They love smoking, those French people. Just
Yeah.
full stop. The smoking rates are pretty wild in France. I've always found this interesting to chat about with you as a slight digression. But is this are you of the opinion that for reform to occur? Because I remember we used to talk about this at VaultFast. For reform to occur, you always need a medicinal program to kind of find its feet and kick off. Or do you think you can kind of bypass that and go straight into an adult use recreational market, or is it always got to be medical first? Or is that going to change as global reform picks up
Yeah,
pace?
we've seen the first, recreational and medical at the same time now, and that's happened before. That has happened, and I think it will happen more. But places like France, it would have been pretty shocking if they decided to start looking at a recreational program before they even had any medical access.
That'd be wild.
If I was in a patient group in France, I'd have been pretty pissed off if they were talking about a big recreational program without actually getting cannabis to the people who need it most first.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Well, good work, France. All good stuff, I guess, going in the right direction. This next story has been bouncing around a bit. The Parliament in the Isle of Man has approved cannabis licensing. So they've granted license. They're going to permit licenses to produce and export cannabis from the island. Although consumption and sale of cannabis products is going to remain illegal on the Isle of Man. Why are they doing this, George? What do you think is going on the Isle of Man?
Putting it simply, money, I think, is what. I don't think anyone will have any doubts. I don't think that the Isle of Man exists to protect people's financial interests. So I'm happy. People get into cannabis for money. That's fine. There's really broad support as well for medical access and stuff amongst the community in Isle of Man. So that's great. And it does look like they will prioritise domestic access, as we won't. Hopefully, what we won't see is what some jurisdictions have done and just legalise cannabis in an attempt to make loads of money supplying other markets and forget about their own domestic patients. But Isle of Man's a small place. I'm not expecting a ton of licences. The few licences that they probably will grant, likely to be, sought after, because there aren't many licences going around in the British Isles. Obviously, we saw Northern Leaf get one in Jersey recently. But now I'm quite interested in this, battle of the offshore tax havens. Who will win?
We were chatting about the other week, weren't we?
Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man, who will win? I'm not sure there's enough of a role for all of them, Well, certainly not with the current system that we've got in the UK, I think there's going to have to be wider medical access across Europe to create those business opportunities for this to make sense. It'd be nice. There are discussions, in some of these jurisdictions around wider drug reform and some of the opportunities in psychedelics, and if this becomes a kind of easier place for people to set up businesses that are making the most out of drug reform and helping provide products and services that used to be illegal, it'll be really great. But if people only think about money, it might not end up working out, because you have to try and widen access in order to be able to create a market. So even if you only care about money, you still need to make sure there's people to sell this stuff to,
Yeah.
What do you
like
think
this
about the whole thing?
Well, I'm glad you asked, George. I like what I think is useful is the optics of global reform and just getting cannabis in the news. I think a lot of lobbying reform has been focused on direct political engagement, which is obviously a good idea with any subject and is definitely needed. But one thing I think is really useful, and part of this is, some of this is just kind of like subconscious almost, I think, in the minds of politicians and policymakers, but it's just positive news stories around cannabis in places that are familiar to us and don't raise our eyebrows. So I think, like, just the Isle of Man doing this and creating that, it creates a natural conversation with policymakers in the Home Office, in the UK government, like that. I think that's really useful. It's really useful because, and it signals to our government that, preparing what the Isle of Man are essentially doing, as you've outlined, is the preparing for what is going to be a legal market that they will be able to provide. Like it's not like the Isle of Man are taking a massive risk here, and it's like, whoa, that might backfire and you're going to be in deep trouble. They're just being proactive and sensible. Like it totally makes sense for them to get ready, put their hat in the ring to be able to supply and compete with, a number of jurisdictions around Europe to cultivate and to sell medical cannabis. So to me, I think it's a good news story. I think that's the useful in the battle of the smaller jurisdictions that you outlined. I think it's really useful for the UK. It's really useful for them to have that because it signals and shows bigger nations across Europe that it's going to happen. Like I think you would have to be completely ignorant or ideologically blind to suggest that cannabis reform isn't going to come to the UK. Like it would just, you look at the global reform that are taking place on cannabis. Look at just in the past 6 months, the advancements in UK medical cannabis and the ongoing discussions there. You would just have to have your head in the sand to think that isn't going to be something that continues to increase. So I think it's really useful. I think it's a super helpful thing for our government and just wider public.
What do you think the Home Office are up to though? Because there have been people looking for licenses in the UK for a very long time and not getting them. Obviously, there have been some licenses issued for various purposes, but now the Home Office. So, I guess a bit of context for people who don't know about this bit, but the Isle of Man and other Crown dependencies and British overseas territories aren't signatories to the UN Convention. So if they want to do international trade in controlled substances, they need to do that with the Home Office's permission and through them. So the Home Office, it would appear, and I don't know, the inside workings, but they appear to be using these places as kind of test cases for the cannabis industry in the UK, which is a bit of a shame for the people on the mainland, because it's not easy to go over and get residence in the Isle of Man or Jersey, but it's good for the people over there, obviously, and I'm excited to see how it all plays out. I really don't know yet.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think the Home Office. I think sometimes we forget about the Home Office. I mean, Priti Patel is obviously a problem when it comes to liberalisation of cannabis as a drug. Like it's clear that from a Home Office perspective is clearly a problem. You probably couldn't find a politician in the Tory government who would be more opposed. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find
Theresa May. But
yeah, but I mean, even Theresa May, like, I don't know. Who's that? There's a debate. Who's the kinder person?
I think
who's got more empathy, Theresa May or Priti Patel?
I think if Theresa May knew me, she would hate me with a visceral passion. And I think Priti Patel, we probably wouldn't agree on stuff round a dinner table, but I don't think she would bring the level of hatred for my lifestyle, values, and life decisions that Theresa May would bring. That's my take on it.
Every time I name there's a certain person who's a good friend of mine. I don't know whether he'd mind me revealing this. He'd probably find it funny, actually. His surname starts with an S and is also a mountain. You can do that if you know who he is. It probably springs to your mind. And he sends me pictures all the time of Priti Patel, like, because I don't know if this is okay to share. I think it is. Maybe it's funny. Like every time you look at a picture of Priti Patel, it looks like she's having like a dirty thought or like thinking like. Go Google a picture of Priti Patel. I have there's this side of me that can't that just assumes that she's kind of like quite chill and like would be up for control. But then you read the thing she said and stop looking at the Twitter picture. Like she's never gonna get behind widespread liberalisation without a major push from the rest of the party, or her to I mean, I think if it became like a mainstream line amongst the Johnson government, pushed by people like Rishi Sunak, then I think that would put her in a position where she had to move. because I don't know how much.
I think this is in the eye of the beholder. There's like this cheeky looks thing, Paul.
No, Google it. Honestly, honestly. Well, I'll forward you the messages that I get sent. Like every one, you're like, yeah, no, she's not concentrating there. Like her mind has gone. It's wandered. Maybe she's fantasizing about cannabis. No, she's definitely not. But you asked before about the vibes in the Home Office. I think they would. I think there are smart people in the Home Office.
Of course there are. There's some of the smartest people in the country running that place.
Loads of smart people, and I think, despite frustrations that obviously people have with governments, whenever at any period of time, I've no doubt in my mind that there are sensible and smart people in there, carefully observing reforms that are taking place and considering the likelihood of what's going to happen here in the UK. I've said for a while that COVID and Brexit create a perfect storm. Well, not storm's maybe the wrong word, but a perfect mix for a Tory Johnson government to support cannabis reform in a big way. You know, like there are just so many factors which play into the mix that I think. Are you looking at pictures of Priti Patel?
I wish.
Well, I can see you being like, you've Googled Priti Patel, staring up into the distance. But I think I think there's interest, and I think you're right. I just echo what you're saying. It'd be really interesting to see how this plays out with some of those smaller jurisdictions.
But I do want to echo, just say again, just reiterate that I do think it's a shame that there are a lot of talented, passionate people in the UK who aren't going to be getting licenses to do this, run these businesses, and if the Isle of Man and Jersey are a success, we're going to see those places do well, no UK tax benefit from it. At the moment, we're already in the position where all of the cannabis consumed by UK patients legally is imported and none of it's produced here. And now the policy seems to be shifting production into jurisdictions which aren't going to lead to any UK tax revenue. And boring and bang on about it a lot, but one of the main reasons to reform cannabis policy is to raise tax revenue, not to try and push it all out into other places and skirt the issue, so that's my 2 cents.
It's a good 2 cents. And on the subject of cents, it's an American thing, right?
Yeah, that's an American thing. I'm wearing an American or North American hat.
There we go.
Feeling like an American.
I'm a natural. This is such a smooth transition. I'm lost in the reform space. I should have been a news presenter, George, because we're moving on to USA.
I don't think you have the hair for it.
Wow.
I think that's the only thing holding you back from a career as a news presenter, Paul. I'll be honest.
You almost said face, but you went hair.
No, the face is.
You don't have the hair. You don't have the hair for it.
Just the hair. Just the hair.
I nearly said something. No, I'm not going to say that. No. Okay. Thanks, George. Well, I would get it cut if we were not in tier whatever, we're in lockdown 4.5 or whatever it is.
I think your internal stopwatch is broke as well, Paul. I think we're over.
What, time-wise?
Yeah.
No way. We've got 2 minutes. Chuck Schumer lists cannabis as a priority in the first post-election cannabis comments. We talk about USA every time, and we sort of opened with it last time, so we'll finish with it this time. Positive noise has been made over there. Could be real good. Newly installed Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer reiterated on Monday that cannabis reform will be a legislative priority for the chamber as the season ramps up. Pretty good.
That's amazing. If we could get cannabis as high on the priority in Europe as it is in North America, wow, things would be moving fast. It's what a time to be alive, eh?
What a time to be alive. Forget coronavirus. Things are great. No, it's picking up, mate. It's nearly in February. A month of it's nearly gone.
Thankfully, Chuck Schumer did also say that COVID was a more important priority, which is good to hear as well.
That's just good to hear from the people of America, because they're not taking it quite as seriously as some people might want them to.
No, doesn't appear that way from this side of the pond, does it?
No. Come on, guys, get serious. That's all the news for this week. George is doubting my internal clock, but I think we'll find that's about bang on. Thanks for watching the show. Remember to comment below, let us know which story you found most interesting, and win yourself 50 quid. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.